Alex Jones, and I'm here to tell you folks, the world has fallen. The fascist globalist overlords, they're implementing the Great Reset. You don't believe me? I've seen the tapes. Watch it, folks. Watch as these pot-bellied Zoomer goblins work with the Illuminati to pit us against each other. I promise I'd be a good boy.
I'm a good boy.
There's only one cure, folks, and that's liberty. And there's no better channel to find freedom than Fabian Liberty. Anarchy is order. Government is civil war.
You're offensive. Police lives matter?
We're just trying to do school.
What?
You guys have the same sticker as the other.
But this is our space. You're making the space uncomfortable. But you're white.
You're fucking a white male!
What is one way you combat racism? I don't root for white people on the sidewalk.
They want your wallets, they want your guns, they want the wieners off your sons. Democrats.
Oh, no. Oh, we should film it.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that all of the water levels around the world rise by let's say 5 feet. You think that people aren't going to just sell their homes and move?
Just one small problem. Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman! Vaccine!
Children, they're spreading COVID throughout the population at higher numbers. And people are not entitled to turn themselves into deadly biological weapons by spraying disease-laden aerosols wherever they choose, randomly killing innocent people. This is not freedom, this is homicide, and willful ignorance is no excuse.
What the fuck?
Margin of victory yet. It's really impressive, though I'm starting to think he might have had help from the Russians.
Look at me, I'm a gay frog. I'm so cool, I'm so neat. I'll never have children and I'm sterilized. But the media says I'm totally cool. I'm a gay frog, I'm a gay fish. It's so good that I think my daddy actually is.
Oh, shit. Testing. All right, so I guess I'll just drag Jack in because Jack's early. I'm just going to drag you in. All right.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, you're so much earlier than I expected. I was like, oh, he's here. All right.
Oh,
hey,
well,
hey,
yeah.
chat.
I mean, if I could be on time, I'd like to be on time, you know?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're quite a bit early, but that's okay. Hey, Jack. Nice to see you. Real quick to chat.
Yes.
We just went live, obviously, like 2 minutes ago. And then this is
I
not.
didn't even know it.
I haven't really been live other than like 5 times this last like week and a half, and I took like a year off. But anyways, guys, share it if you want to share it or let people know where it is. Love you guys so much. Thank you for showing up. I hope this will be a great conversation. Real quick, before I say anything about who Jack Lloyd is or talk about borders or anything, you know, I just want to open up with something that is. I just want to get something off my chest. And this is to chat. This is you to Jack. This is everybody. Nothing to me is more infuriating currently than the fact that a large portion of the internet has realized that they can make money if they say science-sounding words. And while this has been true for a long time, the fact that this has leaked into like the red pill dating health community like where I will randomly be scrolling Twitter and see like some female being like, why are women attracted to this alpha male in this video? It's healthy metabolism and a metabolic rate. And when you can see the low prolactin, and it's like prolactin is a hormone that like basically only women have to produce breast milk. What the fuck are you talking about? And I don't know why, it just makes me so angry to see like it's a specific type of pseudoscience that just drives me up a wall. Does it do the same thing to you when you see like just like blatant bullshit that you're just like, what?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not someone who is knee deep in biological silence on the daily grind, you know, but certainly there's things that when I read it, I understand that it's nothing more than just buzzwords and catchphrases and pandering and things like that. So, you know, certainly these these kinds of people who are just influencers who have no particular background in any of these things, have never even conducted a quantitative study in their life. It is quite comedic to see them piece together what their, you know, preferences are in certain areas to like make it seem like as if, oh yes, see, I know what I'm talking about here about this particular cause effect relationship. So it is pretty funny. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, welcome, Jack Lloyd. I would say welcome to the show, but I don't even know what this show is anymore because I was on Twitch for a long time in the battleground. It was like the only like hardcore ANCAP libertarian on Twitch, and the censorship combined with like the promotion of like soft core e-girl stuff got to a point where it was like there was no reason for me to be on that platform. And so I've been doing some other things, but I'm kind of coming back, and whilst that was occurring, there's an interesting thing that happened in the liberty movement. And this interesting thing is not, it's an old wound that keeps coming back. The bordertarians versus the open borders people. And it kind of started, I want to say, with a certain downfall in the eyes of most of the online hardcore ANCAP community of one of our biggest messengers, Dave Smith. I think it starts with some of us noticing, I think you were amongst them as well, noticing a kind of parroting of talking points for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was like there's no conversation of like, hey, yes, the Nakba happened, it was terrible, condemn it absolutely. Why are we not talking about like criminal courts coming in and giving people their property back versus deeds that they own within Israel proper? Why are we instead focusing on like socialist talking points over the last 40 years? It's like we're not approaching this as libertarians first. We're approaching this as anti-war people first, which is fine, but it feeds into a certain narrative. And then there was kind of this spiral where I would say that Dave Smith, no offense, I know this is like starting off kind of clout chasing, but I'm not trying to be. I'm just trying to be honest about the discussion, because like I agree with him on a ton of stuff. But where he's kind of just like attacking everybody, calling people commies, and then when they attempt to like be like, hey, you know, I'm open borders, here's why I'm open borders, then he's like, oh, not only are you a communist, but like, how dare you forget about the will of the people? And like, we're like, wait, what? And so you were one of the voices of reason that I've seen, and maybe one of the less toxic people in terms of this discussion. And I hope to represent the other side as well. And like, so please introduce yourself, talk to people, say why you're here, tell us what's going on. And hopefully we can have a cordial and philosophical conversation from here on out about this issue.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here, and just, you know, exactly right. My focus has always been on philosophy, helping change minds so that they stay principled, because in this world, there are so many distractions and so much propaganda campaigns from the government that's constantly tearing at people's minds and getting to fight each other over things instead of being focused on fighting the state. So, you know, it is very distressing and annoying, but happens every 4 years at least. So as for myself, I have a long history within, I guess you could say, libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism. For myself, my own personal journey began way back 2005. Actually, my first introduction to a libertarian book was Tom Woods's Politically Incorrect Guide to American History series. That was back in 2005. And, you know, I was a neoconservative back then, but while I was in college, I I learned about the American eugenics movement. And when I was reading about it, I was shocked. I was like, wait, what? I thought this was something for Germany. I'm like, wait a second. They didn't teach us this in high school. So I started to study that and realized that a lot of the ideas actually came from the United States and were exported elsewhere. And I just was so floored. I was like, okay, wait a second. I got to revisit everything I've ever been taught about history. So that college, course in history that was, just supposed to be some benign course, just generally covering things, really radically shifted my mind, and I started to do research.
Well, so you might be the only person that was radicalized by a college professor and course into libertarianism and not into like Marxism. All right.
Right. I mean, not that he was necessarily promoting any libertarian angle as a professor. Wasn't. It was just he just happened to cover it, and I was like, okay, wait a second, is this not shocking to all you as well? Like, wait a second. So I went down the path at the time, this is well before it was more popular today, but Alex Jones was still kicking it back then. And so I was watching a lot of his content and documentaries. I started to engage more in libertarian culture and things, and started to, research and investigate things, with going to student groups and, just kind of like fleshing out my thinking, debating online, reading and watching, anything and everything I could. And that process took a while, because coming from where I was, being indoctrinated into the neoconservative mindset, there was a lot to overcome. There was a lot of things that were ingrained. Even though I gave lip service to liberty, I was still making excuses for state control. I was still trying to be like, yes, the U.S. government needs a strong military presence and stuff like that. And I had to reconcile those views. And eventually I did. I came to a point where I came across Mark Stevens' No State Project website. He had a question. His website said, should goods and services be provided at the barrel of a gun? And I said to myself, whoa, okay, actually, that's a great framing. Because that's what the government is doing. So I said, you're right, that's not ethical. If I'm going to make an ethical stance, I can't say that it is right to force goods and services onto people just because you say it's for the greater good. I mean, this is truly antithetical to the values I supposedly espouse. And so over a period of 5 years, I went from neoconservative to full-fledged voluntarist anarcho-capitalist, and of course had different progressions along the way, and got involved in some LP stuff back halfway through there in 2007 around. And so, my intellectual journey just continued to grow and flourish. And so after I did undergrad, I went to law school, and my focus was on criminal defense, especially with juvenile issues. That further informed myself about the nature of the state and how much they distort and manipulate things. Eventually I took some of that knowledge, and after, working in the criminal defense arena for a bit, I went to become a state school teacher, learned even more about the bad ways the government manipulates and destroys young people through state central planning. Eventually left that, went and created my own, I had my own tutoring company, but then I expanded to just, do my own tutoring company thing. And then eventually over time, I gravitated more toward focusing on doing things for liberty, still having some private business things I did on the side, but also really focused on trying to change minds. And so that eventually led to different types of involvements, everything from being a part of the original Anarchy Ball team, for those who remember the ball, comic memes, helping to change the culture there and kicking off the viral taxation of theft trend back in 2016, creating my comic book series, Voluntarist, the comic series, which was a lot of fun, helping bring the principles of liberty into a comic context. I produced The Philosopher, who, obviously I think a lot of people know about with all of her different videos about gun control myths and things like that. I did a bunch of other stuff too with helping families learn about unschooling. So as opposed to just homeschooling, and, we have a kid's book, The Unschool Adventure of Jack and Feather, that just came out. So I've spent some time teaching families about what it means to unschool and get their kids out, and, have helped hundreds of families actually exit the schooling paradigm through that work. So, I take all that holistically, and I, educate people. And then eventually, after 15 years of engagement research, I came up with my own books here, talk about the principles, the Definitive Guide to Libertarian Voluntarism on the core principles. And then the second one was A Vision for a Libertarian Future here, which is helping people framework what that would look like if you're working in incrementalism. And then Philosophical Voluntarism, which is philosophy 101 as applies to voluntarism and helping people better their lives through those principles. So certainly quite the lengthy career in terms of producing content, memes, music videos, comic books.
Yeah, there you go.
Kids books,
so
and events and whatnot. So
Yeah, no, I mean you've been around for a long time. It's like it is frustrating because I have spoken to other people about you before, and then they'll be like, who, what? I don't know what you're talking about, and then I'm like, philosopher's husband. And they're like, oh yeah, I know who that is now, and I'm like, you fucking piece of shit. Like I'm not actually mad, but I'm like, I know that has to be like so annoying, like, bro, like it's like you're producing half of that, like, you know, like you've been producing that, like,
yeah,
but it's fair.
Yeah, no, for most of the work I did too, I've used different aliases,
big kind of background,
right? Pages and stuff. I've done a lot of things for different people, but it's often behind the scenes, just like any you know, TV show. You have behind the scenes producers, you have the front facing actors, the talent. But if you go to the credits, there's like, here's all the people who were the executive and the line producers and stuff like that, and they're the ones facilitating the show and make it happen. So, you know, comes to the territory. But I have my own, you know, persona brand and other stuff like that. But of course, I can't help it. My wife is very loved, so I'm not going to fault people for that.
So. Now that we kind of, we you know, resumes aside, you know, you've done a lot of work. Everyone should check out your books. Check out, you know, Jack V. Lloyd, sorry. Because if you just look up Jack Lloyd, you're just going to find, you know, Anakin Skywalker. So like Jack V. Lloyd.
Yeah, Jake Lloyd, yeah.
It happens. Yeah. But yes, you know, I was a commie. There's my whole story. I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot there, but I started off as a commie. There you go. I came from the left into libertarianism, got radicalized by Gamergate, and mostly by a lot of things that happened in my personal life that like kind of recontextualized, you know, like those events like kind of got re-seen because I saw them first through a socialist kind of commie lens and then through a libertarian lens, you know, an elected judge doing horrible things and skirting the laws to get my uncle life in prison for what was probably a self-defense situation, you know, because of racial issues, you know, some stuff I did in the military, you know, and just a few life experiences with the legal system. But regardless, I don't want to get into that whole story because, you know, we have a lot to cover and very limited amount of time, right? I think open borders, closed borders conversations, if you're going to have a genuine conversation and a genuine disagreement, as opposed to kind of just like ridiculous reductios and like absurdities, this is deep. This is a lot. There's a lot to unpack here and there's a lot to talk about here. And so I do struggle to stay where, I guess, to start this conversation off. Maybe we can have a ground level that we can start with, and then maybe you can agree or disagree and we can kind of start from there. So what I would say is when it comes to borders, there are kind of three camps. Really, there are four camps. There are four positions that I've noticed. There is 99.9% of open borders, which are not libertarians. They don't care about libertarian ethics. They don't care about the non-aggression principle. They might care a little bit about freedom of movement. But essentially what it is that they believe in positive rights and they believe that America is this great country. There are all these wonderful things here and we should bring in as many people as we can, give them welfare, give them education, educate them to be like, you know, productive members of society. And that number can be unlimited. That is the main open borders position, not held by any of the principled libertarians, right? This is kind of like maybe Cato Institute a little bit, but mostly this is like your leftists, open borders, or like Klaus Schwab, like, you know, the large corporate economic people that are like, oh yes, it doesn't matter what happens so long as we increase GDP, you know. Then there is the principled libertarian position of open borders, which is the state is unjustified in stopping people free movement across an imaginary line of property that they don't fucking own to begin with because it's illegitimate anyways. And you are not a libertarian if you believe that it is okay to, or you attempt to justify the state stopping people from crossing that border via violence or aggression. You have the closed borders types, which again kind of splits into two camps, right? The conservative kind of, you know, America, the dream, we just need a limited amount of people coming in because we have all of these systems. And then kind of the Hoppians, which are incredibly small portion again of people that want an invitee system, want some type of system, want trusts established for public property, as opposed to inviting more people to devalue and destroy public property. And this is a political prescription on the way towards anarchism. And then I would say that those are and then last but not least is kind of the position we all hold as libertarians, which is, eventually we want private borders. Like private borders is the ultimate goal. Would you disagree with that as kind of the general political landscape as it comes to borders?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, we could throw in a million different things too, because you can find anything in any one. You could be like, I want it to be race-based. I want there to be no immigration ever. I mean, you could find anything on the internet, obviously. Of course. So there's certainly a wide spectrum in the spectrum of what people say and believe and all this other stuff. So obviously, as libertarians and ANCAPs, we always want to bring it back to both principles and physical reality of what is actually happening and what are individual actors doing and what are they advocating for. So, yeah.
So that being in mind, it seems like from what I've read is that obviously we both want private borders. It seems like you are in the camp of the open borders position, that it is unjustified for anyone to publicly support a policy that would, by its very nature, utilize tax dollars to increase border security to stop people from coming across the border. Am I incorrect in that?
So I think the big problem when it comes to defining my views is that these angles are often loaded in a context already, right? So they already have these prepositions about what the government is doing or should doing. I have such a different formulation from most everybody that I do cover in this book here, but I'll kind of give it in some. So when it comes to the government and the concept of borders, we always have to walk through what is specifically being said, right? When government says borders, we're talking about a political boundary drawn on a map. It's psychological because in reality, the government doesn't just put a line on the map and then magically these walls come up out of the ground and all of a sudden there's a force field, and it's all created and secure. It's like, oh yeah, So it's not empirical reality, right? A border is that political boundary the government draws. And on top of that, it's a psychological framework where the government tells different individual actors, these are, of course, enforcement agents like Border Patrol, part of the Department of Homeland Security. They tell them, hey, within a certain range, we say that you are justified, that is, you'll be legally protected to use force against people for crossing what we determine to be this line. And in this case, as it stands, talk about empirical reality, there's 100-mile border zone from every shore where essentially the government has forfeited the Fourth Amendment and said, well, if it's border control related, like it's a Border Patrol agent, in many cases, they can just search you without suspicion and they can stop you under these pretenses. And even in the 11th Circuit, they can even take your laptop without reasonable suspicion, right? And deprive you of property rights. So when we're talking about borders and what's going on, we have to remember that this is a psychological construct of government given to individuals who are then told to do violence, that is, initiate physical force against other people, based on whatever it is that they define as the scope of the area where they can do this. So that framework, of course, is applying on places where there's pre-existing lands, people, and structures, right? At what is defined as the border zone, there are thousands of private property owners who have different types of things, buildings, they could have homes, ranches, whatever. There's also various state governments that are in competition with this. As we've already seen in the battle between Texas and the federal government, as we've seen, with California, the federal government, there's different state governments that have their own initiatives, agendas, and policies of how they wish to manage these things. So we have these competing psychologies of different people at the state government level, federal government level, and even the individual private property owner level. So when we're talking about what is the position I hold, the first stage is I'm going to talk about the philosophy. And when I say the philosophy here, I'm talking about what is the ethical right or wrong. In the same way I make this analogy, if a woman is robbed by a robber, she has a gun pointed to her, the robber takes her purse, the robber's apprehended. the robber doesn't have the purse, the money spent to this or that, we have a problem. We have a rights violation. But now we have to sit there and say, okay, well, how do we get to from point A, the violation, to point B, the restitution and justice? So as libertarians, our question then is, we currently have the government enacting a bunch of different rules and acts of violence against various people along a very large area,
Yeah, it's a complicated web for sure.
Right. 1,951 miles just in the southern border. We're not including Canada. We're not including the water on the east-west coast. So we are sitting here saying, okay, the government has this program. And regardless of whatever me and you say in this moment, that program is still going, right? Just like we can talk about ideas all day. We're not president, governor, sheriff of a border county, all this other stuff. We can talk ideas that has not empirically changed the relationship between those border patrol agents, state and law enforcement agents, and so forth. So when we're talking about the nature of borders, this concept is, of course, inherently in and of itself an unethical construct, because the government imposing violent force against discrete individual properties that are pre-existing and of course, people as well. So we understand that that construct cannot be considered ethical in and of itself, right? This is not something that, you know, the government is like, oh, well, guess what? We get to say that we get to control your house and your private property. We'll decide what's going to happen with that, right? So we already understand at a ground level that philosophically, this cannot be considered an ethical thing to do. But now we have to sit there and say, okay, how are we getting from point A, which is current government violence, different state governments, some private property along the way, and this conflict also as well with governments funding different people to come over? How do we get from where we're at to a libertarian order? And so some people play this policy fantasy game where they say, well, right now we need to prioritize closing the border and having a strong, as government control as possible. Some people say, well, the government has no right to control anybody, therefore there should be no enforcement actions whatsoever. And I think this sidesteps the empirical reality of what is, right? When we talk about what the government should do, you're already in a place of being powerless, right?
So if I could interject for a minute, this is my biggest contention. One of my bigger contentions. My biggest contention is that open borders people proudly use the term open borders when that doesn't match what most people mean by open borders, and I feel like they should just rename it because I don't like them proudly supporting like Klaus Schwab fucking tactics of state policy, right? Like they're doing so by keeping the name. But my second biggest contention is exactly what you're saying, right? Is there is this kind of disanalogous reductios that occur where people are saying, is this right? It's like, okay, the whole game is wrong. I have a gun to my head. I'm being coerced. I live in this state, right? And the question is option A and option B are both state policies that require rights violations by their definitions. This is true when it comes to policing. This is true when it comes to courts, right? Like the criminal justice. And this is true when it comes to immigration. It might not be true in other things like Medicare or Medicaid, right? Like I can kind of just get rid of one of those things and there's no immediate increase of rights violations elsewhere, right? There just is an immediate reduction. And so, yeah, I'm kind of with you there in the sense that, yes, we are coerced. We are living under a coercive system. And it seems to be that a lot of these it almost seems like when we have these conversations and we're like, okay, but this exists. And then like what you get as a response is a lot of people being like, oh, we live in a society. Cool. Thanks. Anyways, the real philosophers are here to talk. And I'm like, no. You actually have to deal with the reality that we're all coerced and neither of these policy decisions are actually getting rid of the NAP violations as that are kind of inherent in the system. But yeah, please continue. You're on a roll, but I wanted to just interject and be like, yes, that is a very key point that I think needs to be highlighted in these conversations.
Sure. And so exactly as you say, none of those policies are getting rid of the violations or themselves making restitution. And so when we're talking about this situation, the goal is to say how we can get as principled an outcome as possible, right? And when we're doing this, if you can get that power, right? And that's what we're talking about here. Because if the people who are just discussing ideas do nothing, right? They don't run for office, they don't vote or this or that, whatever. Well, then in that paradigm, you haven't changed anything, right? So when you're trying to change minds, the question is what type of psychology are you imbuing on others? And what does that then lead to in ripple effect? Just like any other economics discussion, when we talk about what are the consequences of the unseen. So when you're trying to educate people on these things, the solution in terms of moving forward toward a libertarian order, it needs to actually be both functioning as a return to private society in terms of private property. And it should also be something that doesn't reinstitute democracy, collectivism, or forced democracy and some new pseudo-democracy, right? Those are both things that take away from that end goal. So as libertarians, voluntarists, ANCAPs, minarchists, whatever, if we're not supporting people and supporting resolutions and supporting outcomes that are getting us to there, then we're not actually fixing anything in net. We're just shifting around how the government is doing violence.
Yes.
Empowering it to do one thing or whatever else. And the big concern that underpins all this is that when you start to use collectivist language like will of the people, when you start to say, well, this is just what people want, this, that, you start to justify a new form of state growth, a new form of a police state. And if libertarians get into power, that is, if you want to see a libertarian future, if you want to see Javier Milei's coming in, to fullness in different areas, right? You need to be principled and have people say, okay, I'm going to focus my efforts and energy on those who understand that, and those who are going to say, we are going to move toward privatization. We're going to open up defense, as in market defense and self-defense. And you want to actually have people who not in any way, shape, or form are going to renege on that or make exceptions. Because if you do, as we know very well, that is going to lead to state growth.
So I didn't expect the conversation to go here. There's a lot to unpack because you said an insane amount of things. There's a lot to unpack, but this last point that you're grappling with, which I do deeply agree with. There is this interesting debate, and I've had it with people because I know you talked with Liquid Zulu before. And it's not so much that I've had this debate, but we've kind of had this conversation where it's difficult to know which is the right answer, because there is the more objectivist leaning side. And again, wasn't expecting this to go there, but we're here, which is this concept that it's far more important to have a few philosopher kings. It's far more important to absolutely browbeat and gatekeep anyone that is even slightly wrong on the philosophy, to create a very small and ideologically pure movement that really understands the philosophy to its core. And you don't get to call yourself a libertarian unless you get all of these things. And then there's kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is, tying this into open borders versus closed borders, right? Hoppe's position, which I deeply agree with, is an invitee system. Well, what is the invitee system? Is it really that much of a reduction in NAP violations from the current system? Not that much of one. The open borders ones, I think open borders requires an increase in NAP violations. They would disagree, but I think that they're inexorably tied to other things. I think the conservatives of just lock down the borders, or, the Dave Smith's, will of the people, militarize the border kind of language is, as you stated, psychologically moving in a completely wrong way. Even if there's a short-term thing, because we have to understand the gun is to our head. We're negotiating with a monster that has 1,000,000 times more power than us, and we're trying to see how can we subvert this monster. How can we introduce concepts of liberty psychologically to people? And that is kind of like Hoppe's position is an invitee system is not about democracy. It's not about the will of the people. It's bringing it back to the concept that an individual wants to invite an individual, and then they hold themselves financially responsible for that individual. As we begin to ingrain the concept of individual responsibility that comes with freedom. And you can disagree with that specific policy, and that's fine. But I do think you are correct in the presumption that it cannot simply be one policy that is tied to all of these other policies where we really don't know the outcome and we haven't really gotten rid of the beast. But unless, of course, that policy just straight up reduces taxes and like I said, getting rid of Social Security, for example, right? That's just that would be a win. I'd hit that button every goddamn day. But yes, the psychology, the concept of individual person individual responsibility, and recognizing that libertarianism cannot exist in the world unless whichever society adopts it has at the very least a certain critical mass of people that are willing to accept those precepts, right? Like they don't need to be philosophers, but you can't have a libertarian society that's 90% full of communists, right? Like, cause you'll just have a communist revolution. Like, like you might make it might last a day, right? But like 1917 is coming tomorrow, right? So you have to have at least a certain percentage of people that are like willing to accept the concept of like, all right, whatever, I'll buy a rights enforcement agency. I don't think this is the right way to do it, but like whatever, like if this is what gets me by, at the very least I'll accept this as a means of getting from point A to point B.
Yeah, sure. So I'll address, everything that you mentioned here. I mean, obviously you do need that cultural change to maintain anything, because as always, if everybody has a certain viewpoint, then performatively they're going to act in accordance with that, just like slavery was normalized, hundreds of years ago. And if most people accept slavery, it's hard to upend that because they support it and they support it in action. So when we're talking about the question of what we're doing with getting from point A to point B, Hoppe's invitation system, while certainly seeming alluring at first, just with this idea of, oh, see, we're going to secure this somehow, kind of has a few philosophical problems with it. When you're talking about, okay, well, what does that mean when we actually walk through what that looks like, right? Because it's one thing to say, we have the system. Okay, but what does that mean? What are the actors and the actions? So in order to have the invitee, who is verifying that invitation? Who's keeping record of it? Who is holding that money? Who is responsible for enforcement? Who's responsible for checking to see which person was invited versus maybe who got in secretly otherwise? Once you start to walk through those things, you're coming back now to a certain type of a police state, because you're like, wait a second. So the government wants to have a registry of these people. They need to check who is, currently bonded. Oh, and who's getting that money? Oh, the government giving the government money. Okay. If that's a great idea, I mean, I don't know if that's where you want to go with those things. And then on top of that, okay, well, now there's this whole thing that people can come in, but they're invitees. But now we have to also check and see and check papers, please, to see, oh, are you actually here? You're supposed to be here. You look a little too Mexican, like you just came across the border, right? So we have this serious problem where without an actual rights violation having been performed, the government is demanding payment, someone's money being taken by force, because if you do not pay that bond, then you will be taken to jail, of course. Otherwise, what's the enforcement mechanism, right? You have to have enforcement in order to have something be paid. So we're saying the government creates a new threat of force to pay the government money to monitor and itemize and systematize and database who these invitee people are and their hosts. So it's kind of the opposite of moving away from a police state and giving the government more money to manage and control things. It's actually roping in more of a surveillance state. And so
let me respond to that. Yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, I would have to completely disagree, obviously. So the issue that I see with the logic of the counter argument here, is that there's no offered solution other than the dissolution of the state that doesn't fit the description that you just gave. The open borders, the open borders position is also every critique that you just had of the Hoppe invitee system can also be given of the open borders position, right? Of the concept of disallowing the state to invite, to control the border access. So I don't, when you say it's creating a new system, I think that's a little bit disingenuous, right? Because the system already exists to catalog immigration status, right? It's not like you're like, oh, you're saying it's increasing the police state in the sense that it's creating a new system to categorize people. We already have that system in our current immigration. Like, I don't understand that critique. Maybe you can explain that position to me a little bit, because I'm trying to understand where the new system is coming from, and I also don't understand. And again, this is a system under the threat of violence that already exists. It is, how do we get towards liberty is the question here, right? So what is the alternative? Because you showed up your book and you said, well, there actually is a system. So I would love to hear the alternative as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we're talking about this situation, we're, again, compared to what's going on, people who are coming to the U.S. for various reasons can do so under a passport system. They have their passport stamped. They might have their stuff scan coming in, this or that. Depending on what type of allowance they have, they might have a short-term vacation ability to come in, on a mutual agreement. They might have a work visa. They might have green card. They could be, having some type of special arrangement through asylum. There's a variety of ways the government currently lets people in under special circumstances who are outsiders for either temporary or permanent resident alien status, right? But when we're talking about the invitee system, we're talking about an ongoing monitoring of someone and their payment being conditioned. In other words, they have to pay the government money in order to come in the first place. And this is done under the threat of force, as in, for it to be enforced, there has to be some type of violence being metered to say, if you don't pay us this money, we'll throw you in jail, or we'll maybe pick you up and throw you out or something like that. So when it comes to that, what's being established,
you haven't differentiated that from any of the other systems still.
Yes,
You've just laid a positive claim that already exists for all of the other systems.
It doesn't exist. There's no bond.
Yes, it does.
You don't pay a bond to get a passport. When a bond on you just existing and saying,
when
hey,
you say,
insurance?
Hold on.
Bond.
Hold on. I think it's obviously disingenuous to compare passports from people on vacation to other forms of immigration. Yes, you're correct that passports for a short-term vacation, right, where you're allowed in the country for a few weeks to visit and spend money, is not the same thing as, let's say, green card or a lottery system where these people then get put into the database. They're given a number where they pay taxes to the IRS when they come, right? Like, you haven't differentiated those immigration systems as being substantially different, but you have thrown a lot of loaded words onto the invitee system as if it is special. And I don't know, that seems a little bit rhetorically bad faith, but maybe if I let you continue, you'll get to it. And I'm missing something.
There's no bad faith. None of the other things you just mentioned involve posting a bond to the government. There's no if you want to invite, you have to notify us the invitee, and then you have to pay money to the government, a sizable amount, to cover their being in the U.S. That's just a fact. That is an additional requirement for invitee. Otherwise, there'd be no bond, right? If there was no bond, then maybe you could get close there. But the fact that there's a monetary bond being paid to the government without an actual violation of body or property rights happening in the first place is definitively the government extorting people for money in order to come across. That's true. So how is that not true for a green card? Right? Like, I understand that the concept of like paying up front, right, the full cost principle, as Hoppe puts it, which isn't something that I necessarily agree with being an upfront cost, right? If we want to take his, I kind of agree with you that the upfront cost seems a little, I don't want to say egregious, but like maybe it's kind of like taxing wealth, right? Like unrealized gains kind of situation. Like I think it should be post hoc, but how is that substantively different than people that come here and then pay taxes? Like it is the exact same concept that is occurring under our current legal immigration system. The only difference is that under the invitee system, an individual is a co-signer for other potential legal ramifications such as criminality or deportation. That the invitee will post money in the event that person is deported or something like that, which is a net reduction to the current taxpayers, that then brings it over and shifts the current taxpayer that is having to fund these systems, because the Department of Justice is going through those criminal courts, and the Department of Justice giving loans to NGOs that are acting on our behalf. So it's shifting the burden from the current taxpayer to the individual that wants to invite another person, right? I don't know that you're actually describing a net increase in non-aggression. What it seems like you're kind of just like saying that it is, because it's different in the way that in whom it puts the responsibility on, which is a shift in personal responsibility in the invitee, which is, as we stated earlier, I think a component of what is psychologically better. No, I think that what you're doing right now is that you're saying that even though the government is currently telling, or the government would be telling people if they wanted to invite somebody, again, this is a private property rights issue. We are currently in that ethic, right? What right does the government have to demand payment of a bond from an individual inviting another individual to come for whatever reason? Especially, for example, let's just say they're inviting them to come work. Someone's ready and willing to work, but they say, "Oh, well, the government wants $20,000 from you as a bond for them to come." Well, I don't have $20,000 to pay for them. So you're saying the government's going to get in the way of economic activity that this guy's we're ready to pay him, but we don't have 20,000 liquid to pay right off the bat. So just like that, the government is now interfering in the private market, is making a condition on private property rights invitees in the first place. And then the government's taking this money to do what with, right? The government's being empowered with more money for themselves to what is ultimately monitor people,
you're not making an argument against me. You're not making an argument against my point, right? Like you're making an argument that the government that immigration, where the government takes taxes and taxation, is wrong. Agreed, right? The situation here is that we have a web of laws that have all kinds of property rights violations. The open borders position, for example, every time an individual comes in, and we still have civil rights legislation, every individual that comes in is by its very nature going to interact in the community in such a way where I can't exercise my private property rights. I'm not allowed to say no Irish need apply. Right? Like I'm not allowed to say I don't rent homes to the Irish, right? If Irish people get brought in either by invitee or by like an open borders position, right? There are rights violations. There's all of these rights violations that exist in the state. And I agree that the bond system or taxes or the existence of the IRS or the existence of the state are all wrong. The question is with this web of all of these property rights violations in multiple different ways, how do we transition towards a system that actually begins to decrease the power of the state?
Exactly right. And that's all I was pointing to, is that type of invitee system, that bond system, doesn't move us toward that end. So if you want the specifics, then moving into what I was talking about with my book, A Vision for a Libertarian Future, there's a few things that could be done. And again, all these advocacies are meant to be just something that's done in tandem by a principled person. Because in reality, if you don't control every aspect of government, if you don't control every state government and all this other stuff, you don't actually have the ability to flick a switch and all of a sudden everything's magically better. So you need someone who stays principled no matter what, who doesn't compromise, who doesn't excuse state power, size, scope, growth, that kind of thing. So the two ways that I think that are very key toward moving to this end, first and foremost, is public auction. So I mentioned in my book, public auction moves the government-held property into discrete private own. Citizens being able to purchase those things is the only way to do that.
You broke up right as you were describing public auction. I almost probably agree with you, because I even have on my list of notes of things, trusts, right? Like I wanted to say right now before you get going, I currently hold in trust all of the property within Colonial Heights, Virginia, that is public property. And if someone has a better claim to a trust of how we can auction off all of the public property towards the public, and be my guest. But as of right now, no new immigrants may use this property, and no newborn children may use this property until they can prove that they have paid taxes in some form, because this stolen property ought be given to the people as restitution for stolen tax payment. But please explain your public auction system.
So when we're talking about public auction here, we're talking about what is. The government holds 640 million acres. Currently, the federal government, state governments also have land as well, and structures and property. So subjecting the government property to public auction over a course of years gives an opportunity to have competition in the market, of people market signaling how much they value this property. After that auction is done, the government can take proceeds after they pay off what's necessary to manage and finalize the auction, stuff like that, and remit those payments to individuals, that is individuals respectively to a jurisdiction, or if it's the wider federal government, to all federal tax victims. And in doing so, the government has not only caused the property to become private, they have also engaged in a restitution metric. Of course, it's imperfect because it can never be perfect.
100% agree.
But it actually has moved toward a true proprietarian order, instead of creating a new form of democracy and conflict over scarce resources through votes or whatever else. And in doing this type of thing, we actually get to see a meaningful form of long-term growth with everybody, because as it takes place, people will have, of course, the resources from whatever was remitted. And again, none of this is weird or new. So in my book, I note that the government currently already has tons of auctions for land, buildings, depreciate assets. I mean, many people have gone to military surplus stores and they buy stuff that was sold at auction for military surplus. So it's not weird. And the government, of course, remits people money between, when you do your tax returns. That's the Santa Barbara Corporation that does the electronic funds transfers directly to bank accounts. People could also have a check sent to them, like they do physical mail, and you can have that done with the bank, and you have that payment, and the government pays them accordingly for facilitating that. And then you actually have true dissolution of property, and you have discrete private property owners. And this is not
hold on one
weird.
second. Yeah. No. I agree. I don't think we need to get into the nitty gritty of how the checks would be distributed, but yes, no, I absolutely agree with the concept of trusts or public auctions. I will just a small caveat that is important to note, right, is that not all public property isn't already owned to an individual, right? Like there are cases of eminent domain where like there already is a legitimate private property owner, and that property obviously can't be auctioned until that situation is resolved in some degree. Especially those that were done by condemnation, like in New York and stuff. But yes, I agree. Other like than that, which is
domain. Yes, I specifically note that. I talk about many instances of that and give an example of a recent family that had lost their park by Los Angeles County. It was taken in the early 1900s. The park was then restituted to the family, and then the family sold it back to the government, which is silly, but there's for $10 million. But the point being is that when it comes to these types of policy advocacies and these types of visions, these are not unrealistic. These things happen all the time. The government can privatize. The government can certainly auction things. So the question then is how do we instill this as a norm of language and a psychological consistency across the board? Because again, when you do this, you're making the next level advocacies. In the meantime, the government is still acting with border control. It's not like they're not. They're still fighting over it, the different governments. So we could talk about that all day, and the government actors right now are just going to continue to do what they're doing until they are vanquished or replaced. And that's a fact. So we have to sit here and say, okay, that's currently happening, but what do we want to see? And if we don't be consistent about what we want to see, then we don't get there, because people keep playing I'll pick the lesser of two evils conceptually thing. And
okay,
instead of actually
we're bouncing.
More,
we're bouncing around, like we're kind of on a tangent, and we're bouncing all around, right? I do agree that the discussion of public property and what we ought do with public property, right, is an important discussion that we have in regards to. Kind of jumped from there in terms of the Hoppian position on invitee. And then you said, well, there was a second, kind of position that you had a better position, but I don't know that position is necessarily that is something that ought be done. I agree. It ought be done that we transition, public property to private property, right? I mean, there's, Hoppe's work, public common private property, and the rationalization for total privatization, right? Which is, kind of similarly, discussing the same thing. He gives a little bit of a justification for egress and things that I think are rarer and don't apply to public property, because what public property is kind of, I do agree with his approximation of what it is, which is forced ownership, but I don't necessarily agree that you have per se an easement right to these things. And there is going to be some issues too of like the donut issue, right? Like the Blockian proviso situation where like a private property owner might be in a state park, and then how do we get access to that, et cetera. There'll be issues. I think ultimately the thing is kind of true with the Israel situation, kind of what I stated earlier, and what you're talking about too, is that like it will kind of come down to individual things. I don't know. I don't know if I can go with you fully, but maybe, I don't know. I'm kind of 50-50. I like what you're saying. I'm kind of 50-50 on whether or not I believe that the government can handle it responsibly. And yet there is kind of a practicality thing there where it's like, cool. Would it be better handled completely privately? Sure. But that would require the dissolution of the state. So maybe not, and I agree that is an important component to resolving the issue of the borders, full privatization of property. But even if every piece of property was privatized in the United States, with the exception of like just the DC buildings, right, we would still have this conflict of open versus closed borders. And we would, in theory, almost have more rights violations by those kind of border control systems, because we would have even more private property that the state demands we don't have private property rights to. Right.
Well, this is partially why I wrote a whole book on the topic, because that talk about privatization is just literally one of 100 different aspects I address. So if you'd like to talk about the rest of those, I can certainly put it in context, because it's not just supposed to be one thing that we want people to think on. I address citizenship, for example. As libertarians, as voluntarists, there is no ethical right to citizenship. Citizenship is a government-created construct. It is not itself some type of thing that one has a property right to. So government curtailing citizenships is always an ethical thing to do, because no one has an ethical right to citizenship. So I say, in tandem with that, the end of birthright citizenship is absolutely necessary. So the idea that people just are born somewhere and all of a sudden the government now makes them a taxpayer slave, that's unethical. We need to be for ending birthright citizenship. It should be opted into, if anything. And I specifically note there that when it comes to this issue, what you're talking about with the invitees or people just coming across, switching citizenship to a paid model, a different type of model, is actually pretty normal in many countries around the world, where you can buy citizenships, from St. Kitts to Greece to Malta. There's places where if you want citizenships for certain reason, you can buy that citizenship as a concept for whatever reason. The government should still treat people with civil rights protections regardless. But the idea that if someone wants to become a part of the citizenship thing, that should be something that's opted into. And in addition to that, if there's going to be an opt into that, I put a type of a gradation on that, depending on whether your parents are both citizens, whether one parent's citizen, whether no parent's citizen, and so on and so forth. And if we switch to that type of model, now we're starting to remove those welfare incentives, right? You can't just jump.
Yeah, I agree that I do agree that, like, if you're purchasing citizenship, there isn't a substantive difference in non-aggression principle violations in one way or the other, but there is a psychological change there, where the opt-in process is kind of changing. I mean, you're getting closer to that kind of gulch kind of concept of like a privatized state in that regard. So yeah, no, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I guess, I mean, there are a lot of things to discuss, but before, because I know you said you only had like an hour. I really do want to get into.
I can go a little longer if necessary to explain.
I love it. For sure. Yeah, there is a lot here. So I wrote a couple of things here, which that I wanted to talk about. One of the things that I guess I want to bounce this idea off of you, which is that, who is the prima facie owner? And it seems that of current public property, it seems that your system, and maybe this was just kind of like a generalization because you have a big book about it and you're just trying to like hit the key bullet points, right? So I don't want to straw man you. It seems like for most things you want to auction. I have a belief that if some private entity, or at least pseudo private entity, like an entity that is, public, like a private company that might be publicly traded and do some government contracts, but a private entity is managing and maintaining a property, that they would be the prima facie owners as opposed to auctioning of those things. But in the same position, some form of court system or some trust, right, that is set up in the people's interest would require payment for the property that they are maintaining. So, for example, I think plenty of us, famously libertarians love talking about roads, right? So, for example, roads, right? I would say that many roads ought to be auctioned off as you and privately and transferred over to private owners. But let's say there's a bridge in Richmond, for example, Chippenham Parkway, where there's multiple ways to get around. But Chippenham Parkway has this big bridge that was built in part by tax-paying money, but also in part as an investment, and it's a toll road. And it is currently being maintained by a private entity already. And they're paying for the maintenance and recouping their costs via a toll that they have. And so it is like, it's a pseudo-state, pseudo private kind of like thing. It's a monstrous kind of combination. But I would say is that you wouldn't auction that off. What you would say is, okay, you're the prima facie owner as someone that is maintaining kind of already exerting the right to exclude, right, which is the private property right. And there is said trust in some form of court or whatever to attempt to determine the value as best we can of that property so that they can kind of pay restitution for, you know, whatever tax money they put that they took to gain that property. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you believe that it really should be in almost every case auctioned, even if there is someone that's kind of already having that role as a property owner in a pseudo position?
Sure. So there's two key aspects that to dissect. The first is, how are these people being paid in the first place? If these managers are being paid by taxes, then they are themselves being paid by theft. So they couldn't be the prima facie owners if they themselves are actually being funded by taxes. So, you know, sidestepping that though, to look at the solution, when it comes to what I advocate for in terms of auction, the primary auction things are things that are just lands and physical assets and things like that. By and large, there's quite a bit to do there.
I mean, like state parks and stuff.
Potentially, yes. So there's certain other things that I advocate for as well, because, for example, the government has, of course, made roads and roads abundantly through hiring private contractors and paying for it through taxes, right? Most everyone, I would say, probably wants roads to remain relatively free and accessible for people to use. It's certainly a market demand. People like being able to use roads, right? So when we're talking about dismantling state power, in my book, I define the state as three core things that make up the state, right? The state is a unilateral claim of force against pre-existing lands, peoples, and structures, right, by either a person or a small group of people. And the three attributes that define a state are taxation, conscription, and eminent domain. Those three attributes are what define statism, as opposed to just a rudimentary mafia, right? The taxation, the conscription, the eminent domain. So if we're moving toward a libertarian order, there's certainly a drive for people who want the government to still provide goods and services in this transitional, kind of phase, essentially. So the question that is, okay, well, how do we get the federal government to become more like a private corporation, essentially, over time, moving toward a voluntary means of funding if people still want that? And in my book, I specifically enunciate that historically, the United States government was actually funded in large parts by lotteries, going way back to colonial times. The Jamestown colony was funded by lotteries. Even parts of Harvard were built by lotteries. Lotteries currently exist in over 45 states, and of course, tribal communities where the state governments collect money, from those lotteries.
It goes to education.
Right, education, right? $1 billion over in Florida, for example. So when I'm talking about incrementalism, right, I'm here to try to cut the size, scope, power of the state and those thefts. Now, the order in which we're talking about these things and the movement, I focus on moving it toward means of government earning revenue away from wide general collectivism to more things that are opted into. So, for example, if you play the lottery, you choose to play the lottery. You're not forced to play the lottery. If you don't like the lottery,
right,
religious reasons, otherwise, you choose it. Yet people still play it, even though it's not, a gun to your head. You have to play lottery. The government gets funding that way. I think that in a transitional, kind of framing, as taxations are being wiped out, the government can use that, and possibly even a remnant taxes on casinos. Again, this is in transition, a long-term thing, to fund core remnant government functions in order to, basically administrate those last remnant things. And I say the same thing in terms of roads, right? When it comes to funding of roads, we already have taxes, gas taxes, and toll roads and all this other stuff, despite property taxes and everything else. So it's not very hard to imagine that if the government were to move to a more voluntary funding model, the government could have free and paid express lanes like they do now, and that subsidizes the free lanes. They could have special toll roads where you pay to go use that toll road, and that's how that's funded, and other things are funded. Again,
one thing. Sorry, I know I keep interrupting you, but I sometimes I don't know when to jump in. You're really passionate, and apparently you put a lot of work into your book. I'm gonna have to buy it. I'm absolutely gonna have to buy it, because every time you say something, you're like, "Well, I explained this a little better in the book." I'm like, "Well, fuck, now I read the book." All right, I don't know if that's on purpose, you know what I mean? But but nevertheless, so one of the aspects that I would add to this, kind of just like the cherry on top to what you're saying, is that I think I do agree with you, and I'm not trying to say like you're wrong. I'm just saying, kind of value order of like the way that I see things, right? I think one of the most important things, and this is kind of how I talk to conservatives, especially, and paleo libertarians, is look, I won't get rid of any fucking state power here, right? You in this first step, okay? Just hear me out. Just let the private companies compete for this thing, right? Like, and I think that is a really also a very, very, very important first step before like when we switch over things. It's like, look, currently we have the Food and Drug Administration, right? Food and Drug Administration sends back, like they have to recall 25% of all drugs. If you do even just a cursory inspection of what large pharmaceutical companies are doing in third world countries with the drugs that then come over here where they're not even wearing fucking shoes, and you realize how poisonous and disgusting like our drug manufacturers are compared to small mom and pops that are in America that the government harps on and fucking like that are just making like polypeptides, right? Like just like small pharmacy, like, I mean, it's horrible. Like there's the amount of abuses and horror stories and fucked up things the FDA has done are any libertarian has like 20 in their head that they're immediately like, I'm thinking about the AIDS epidemic and AZT or like whatever it is, like they fucked it up, opioid crisis over and over again. And so my pitch to conservatives often is like, look, we'll keep the FDA. Relax. I'm not trying to get rid of the FDA tomorrow. All right. Let's just let insurance companies and the private companies also bring in drugs that the FDA says you can't have, right? And you have the freedom to take whatever drugs you want. And then other companies can say whether a drug is safe or not. Let them do the same thing that the FDA does and let them do that. And I think what happens often is that there are so many people that are unconvinced that the market can provide solutions. And the reason they're unconvinced is because the state maintains a monopoly on it. So there's a status quo situation where like, this is how it's always been done, so it must be done this way. And I think the biggest way to transition these things is to just not necessarily to destroy the state component. I would love to. Give me that magic button, I'll push it, right? But like, I'm never going to get the votes for that. But like, just giving the freedom for other companies to take and private entities to take that place, I think what you will find, and it would same thing with policing, right? Can my local sheriff's department, yes, we'll use tax funds. Oh my God, that's so bad. I'm evil. I'm justifying the non-aggression principle violations. Piss off. I'm trying to transition to something better and I'm doing what I can to do that. I'm not justifying NAP, right? I'm just saying, would it be possible for a place to fire all their police department people and hire a company instead? And it's like, yeah, the FBI can still exist, right? Like, state troopers can still exist, but like, will this company do a better job than your fat fucking sheriff that got elected? Probably. And I think that's a key component first and foremost. I don't know, maybe I'm just like repeating shit you've already said or thought too, but I just wanted to like add that on first. Like before we even talk about like the state thing, like I think that has to be the first step, before we even get into that.
You're completely right in the core of what you're saying. And that's actually what I promote in my book specifically, is that if people want to see a freer future, the goal should be about how do we get market solutions freed so that the state can be outmoded naturally, right? The whole goal is how do we free the market? How do we get government out of the victimization of everybody for victimless crimes and regulations and things like that? If you can do that, then you are actually providing the alternatives that let people become less dependent on the state. And that's exactly right. That when it comes to our libertarian advocacies at the forefront, that is what we are trying to tell people, is that a voluntary order is what allows people to choose what's best for them in the market. It gives immediate signals. The central planning has so many miscalculations and is rooted in violence. It cannot be more ethical and it cannot be more effective. So when it comes to promoting these things, that's exactly what I do with every angle. My question is how am I reducing state control and allowing the market to flourish? How are we intelligently moving toward that smaller and smaller government by not just trying to, sit there and move chairs around and try to make government agencies more efficient? No, we're trying to say government is getting out of the way, government agencies are closing, and or the market is being freed immediately in such a way that the competition just takes that over, just like the United States Postal Service, right? If we had competition in 13-ounce letters, there would be other companies that would outmode that potentially too, within relatively short time, once the business, of course, got established and all other stuff. So that is exactly the core of everything, is that a free market
maybe
enables.
Just to be fair, right? Just to be fair, right? Like just letting competition win isn't always going to outcompete the state. It will outcompete the state in terms of efficiency because of the economic calculation problem, et cetera. But I mean, if the state maintains its ability to tax citizens when it loses money or it's inefficient, of course, the state has an advantage that the private market could never have in that regard, which is that they can steal more money. But I mean, the first step first is there being a private solution, even if they don't do it quite as elegantly as I would say, they do it, might not do it as inelegantly and brutishly as the state does it, because they're not capable of taxing. But that's kind of a first step, and then we kind of have to pull in the reins of the state because they will just tax and tax and tax to solve the problem.
Well, that's why the whole philosophy here, it's holistic. You don't have to pick and choose one thing or the other. If you adopt the philosophy, you're always about all these things all at once. Now, if you say, well, what's my political reality if I get elected to president? Well, you're going to be circumscribed by the Constitution. You're going to be circumscribed by what Congress may fight you on, or you might get sued over. Of course, that is a political reality of working within that framework. But as libertarian philosophers, as ANCAPs, we don't have to compromise or pick and choose. We say, these are our values. This is what we're aiming for. And if we do get power in a position in any way, as small as school board, as big as the presidency, we're going to apply those principles across the board consistently. We're going to look for ways to get government out of people's lives and wallets. We're going to look for ways to get the government out of any regulation of businesses and shutting things down and picking winners and losers. We're going to get the government out of this crazy warfare welfare state. You don't have to pick and choose. You just say, here's what I can do as best as I can in my role, depending on what you're allowed to do, within the status paradigm. But you don't have to be apologetic or say, well, I need to prioritize this or prioritize this. No, you don't. You just do it all. You say, okay, here's what I can do within this position. These are my powers. I'm able to do this, this, and this, and I can't be stopped because I have full whatever statutory constitutional authority to do so without being stopped. And
this might be a point of contention here, and I think this might be why you lean more towards kind of the open borders position. I lean more towards the closed borders position, right? So let me give you a separate metaphor. It might be a reductio, and if you reject the metaphor, I understand, right? But I think it elucidates a specific problem, right? With that concept, which is that sometimes there is an equation of the state where one rights violation is tied to multiple other rights violations. They're inexorably linked together, right? So for example, let's say I was the libertarian, right? And I have, that was elected to be in charge of the prisons, like regulating prisons, right? Now it is unjustified for the state to house criminals. The state has no right to house criminals. It is absolutely 100% against, you cannot claim that it's not a violation of the NAP because the state doesn't have a right to exist. The state is not a legitimate actor in any of its criminal convictions. Now, these criminals might not necessarily have rights, so it's criminal versus criminal, right? But even still, the state doesn't have that right. And there's plenty of people that are wrongfully convicted, and there are plenty of people that are put in prison for nonviolent, victimless crimes. If I have that power and then I say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of prisons, right? Like there's no more prisons in the United States. All criminals, all prisoners, right? We're going to let them out on the street. But the state maintains its right to be the only person that are allowed to arrest people and the only people that are allowed to house criminals while at the same time not exercising housing criminals. Like we're in a really bad spot, right? We're in a spot where like the worst, most aggressive criminals are just kind of out on the streets doing whatever they want, and there's no deterrent and no means to stop them other than immediate self-defense. So it's like, can you legitimately say that it would be good for someone to push the button to destroy all prisons without the choice or the market mechanism, the liberty to be able for the market to be able to actually do that? And I think in certain regards, if the market isn't able to do that and the state is stopping the market from doing that, then I don't know that you can necessarily get rid of the state's control of that when you individuate it because it's tied to so many other things.
Yeah, I just don't see this hypothetical as having any real world weight. Obviously, there's no one person that you hit a button and then magically there's no prisons in 50 different states and different localities. And all this stuff. So
no, I mean, it's a reductio to test the limits of the principles.
Pretty silly one. But I think that, again, if you do economics on that, right, what's going to happen, right? What's the and then what's? If the government says we're releasing all bad guys. There's some who are, of course, innocently kept. There's plenty who are bad. What is the public response going to be to the nature of the state if the government hamstrings them from defending themselves while also unleashing the criminals of all kinds of worse types on the public? There's going to be
probably breaks the state. Yeah, right.
Closed screen, closed curtains, end screen. That's the end. No, you're going to create blowback from people being like, "What the heck? The government is the most evil thing ever. They're letting murderers free," and just like, "Oh, we can't stop murderers." Right. Maybe that would actually cause people to finally rise up and put some nooses around some people's heads. You know what I'm saying? So it's something that, it's
so what's the substantive difference between that and open borders? Because I don't see it any difference when you let 7.2 million people through a southern border.
Right. I'm not here arguing that position. That's not my position. My position is the government already manages the borders. I'm not here to try to say, here's what the government should or shouldn't do in this temporary thing. My goal is, how do we get the government to get out of the perverse incentives of picking winners and losers? And I think it was 320,000 people were flown by the Biden administration, right? So
right. Yeah. It's like no forced integration is so proven when you're flying them. It's like, bro, that's literally forced integration. Yeah.
Right. It just gets to a point of being silly. I mentioned this on another show on the Free Thought Project. I said, you could build a wall, but look at Florida, right? People flee on rafts from Cuba because if it's so bad and the incentives are so strong, people are going to do whatever they can to get around it. They'll dig tunnels. They'll get on rafts. And if there's governments willing to fund people over, they'll put them on boats. They'll put them on planes. So if you don't deal with the root and you don't have someone principally dealing with that welfareism root and the picking winners and losers, it doesn't matter anyway, right? Because you have bad actors who are going to bring people in, and then you have the incentives, because people are coming for reasons, all different kinds, of course, but certainly maybe to get economic benefits or welfare benefits, whatever, they're going to find ways around it, especially if they're desperate, right? Thanks to U.S. government policy. Think
so. Hoppe makes that point pretty eloquently, in his kind of original kind of really hopping onto the scene talking about immigration when he makes when he's like, it's really important to recognize that goods have to be invited, people don't have to be invited, right? If there's an incentive for a better life, people will cross borders themselves. They'll hop on a raft, they'll get in a tunnel, they'll do something. If point B is better than point A, some of them, won't, but many of them will fucking find a way to get to point B, no matter what obstacles you put in their path, because point B is better, and that's just it's different than goods. So yeah, I agree with you. There is this kind of, I think Dennis Pratt kind of put out this position, which I thought was as much as he's trying to get us to shake hands, right? He's like, here's the difference between closed borders and open borders people. And he was like, open borders people, open the borders. Number one. Number two, get rid of the welfare state, abolish this, abolish that, abolish that. And then it was closed borders. Number one, get rid of the welfare state, blah, blah, blah. And then at number two, open borders. And I was just like, yeah, pretty much. It really, in a lot of ways, it becomes a fundamental disagreement about which is the greater evil in a consequentialist analysis with a gun to the head. And there are people on both sides that are claiming that they're not doing a consequential analysis, or that consequentialism is evil, which I find to be so, it's such a neophyte, baby libertarian position, because consequentialism is perfectly fine. It's only evil when it's overriding the non-aggression principle, when it's overriding those axioms that we prove via argumentation ethics, etc. Because libertarianism doesn't tell you what you ought do, and so you have to have some other normative ethical framework on what you ought do, and so it is a very baby libertarian position I see often. But yeah, no, I kind of, this was an interesting way for this conversation to go. I appreciate the kind of the thing of maybe we're screaming past each other a little bit. What are systems that we can put, because the reality is that the open borders people are not going to be able to vote for open borders tomorrow. The only places open borders existed ever is the Congo. It only happens in failed nation states, because the nation state is this massive, powerful entity, and them giving up the rights to ID people and passports and immigration is a thing that they're just not incentivized to do, even in a little bit. And the same thing is true probably of the invitee system, right? We would have to really work hard, and even then it would only be a slight increase in my approximation. In other people's, they would disagree with it. That's fine. But yeah, I think maybe the conversation is towards a more realistic approach on what are the incremental changes that we might actually be able to do. And I don't know that that's necessarily arguing pragmatism is better than gatekeeping the philosophy so much as it's saying, well, oh, cool, I agree with you. We can have those conversations, but like, what's our action? What's our praxis?
Yeah, well, I mean, when it comes to this, I just get it back down to what is the empirical reality of individual actors and actions. It's fun to talk about these ideas and debate, as you said. You could talk about consequences and this or that all day, every day. But in reality, are those people who are having these debates, are they meaningfully controlling any of these policies across all these different states, the border, across the federal government? No, they're not doing anything. So the question then is, okay, well, if you're going to unify people in action, right, what is the empirical manifest reality of what you want someone to do and result? And if you focus on a single issue, most likely you're going to end up leading people to just go and be like, well, I got to vote Republican this time because, well, if they don't close this border, we're doomed. Or I got to vote, Democrat this time.
Hold on. So if I can interrupt, your position here is, that's an interesting take. So you're saying if we begin to really play the same politics of wedge issues as the two parties, as opposed to a holistic approach to the philosophy, that we run the risk of playing the same political games where we garner in a large portion of people that focus on us because of a wedge issue, because the majority of people that are, especially voters, pragmatically, are not deep philosophical thinkers, and we should be far more focused on selling a holistic approach to the philosophy as opposed to hammering a wedge issue. It's an interesting take that I hadn't thought about. I think I kind of agree there. I don't know that we're quote unquote winning hearts and minds or the will of the people. if we're hammering in a wedge issue. Sorry for interrupting. I just thought that was good. That was a good point.
You're absolutely right. That is a part of that psyop, essentially, the distract and divide, right? It goes with anything.
Mm-hmm.
You could take abortion, you could take immigration, whatever it is. Those in the state and those especially in the mainstream parties, Democrats, Republicans, they will try to mischaracterize libertarians and say, oh, see, you just want X many millions of people to come across the border, or, oh, you just want to oppress people in this way, right? They try to demonize libertarians and say, you just want corporations to rule, whatever it is. They are in such a strong propaganda campaign against libertarians because they wish to get those one issues to narrowly focus on and then try to blow that up and then dismiss someone, right? It's a really powerful tactic. Dave Smith did that with me and my wife. He tried to frame it in his way that he wanted to say, oh, is this your view? And we're like, that's not our views. Blow that up and then mock us and shame us and say, oh, you're laughing stocks and whatnot. So that's what happens when people lose the bigger picture focus, right? They get so caught up in this is my one issue. Oh my God, if this is the most important election of our lives, if we don't do it. It's like, what are you even doing, right? What are you convincing people to think in? And ultimately, when you just do the one issue thing, instead of having the holistic philosophy and saying, no, you need to be consistent across the board, you get people to say, well, this time I got to vote for Trump. I mean, maybe he'll get the wall done this time and maybe Mexico will pay for it instead of $4 trillion in debt and Operation Warp Speed and Space Force and all this other stuff. So that is the empirical manifest result of compromise. The empirical manifest result of compromise is that people say, I'm so scared, I'm so fearful, okay, I just have to go and support something in the mainstream or else everything will be upended. And that's how Republicans and Democrats win, right? The false left-right divide. Oh, either you're with us or you're against us. And then meanwhile, they're doing deals, shaking hands about growing the warfare state and sending money to countries around the world and arming everybody and all this other stuff. They fundamentally agree when it comes to growing the power of the state. Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, like,
that all day.
I very rarely vote. I spoke to, I speak to people often, and they're like, well, why, ought you vote? And our response to that is always, you ought vote if you can reasonably be sure that whomever you're voting for is going to decrease the size and scope of the state. It doesn't matter whether or not they're Republican or Democrat. Currently, that's probably a Republican if it's a person at all. But in most elections, it's going to be neither. I voted for Governor Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, and people were like, but you're like, oh, you're fake ANCAP. I'm like, look, I looked at him. He was business orientated. He wanted a reduction in taxes, and he specifically promised that he would get rid of the grocery store sales tax because it was a tax that was unnecessary. We could cut spending, and it disproportionately affected the poor at a time when inflation was hitting grocery stores more than anybody. And he did that. And I was like, I don't feel as an ANCAP, I don't feel bad about voting for a Republican who's when he doesn't seem to have increased anything else. Yeah, he got a little mad about the Hatch Act and fucking commies in the schools, but again, I don't see that as a loss, to be honest with you. And so I do think that we do have to work with the state as it exists. But that doesn't mean we have to play a game of lesser of two evils, right? Like this concept that like, you know, oh, I'm going to vote for Trump because it's so important that we vote for Biden. It's the greatest, you know, most important election of our lives. So I'll choose the lesser of two evils. And it's like, dude, you know that like a civil war happened, right? You know, like World War II happened. Like if you just take a cursory inspection of our history, yes, our issues are really important right now and we're living through them, but it's not like these are like these specially, you know, like the climax of world history is happening now and there haven't been horrible challenges in the past, right? Like the concept that you must vote for the lesser of two evils is interesting because it once you begin to take on an understanding of philosophy beyond the baby philosophy, you recognize that the lesser of two evils is evil, and evil becomes an exponential problem especially when it's granting evil. Because when you grant evil, and more pragmatically, especially in the state, when you grant evil into the state, that is, it's always one step closer to the next evil, and it's always a power that will be used against you in the future. And so it's like when you go 1 degree off course, it doesn't really feel like you're that far off course until you're 1,000 miles away, and then all of a sudden you realize that you're miles off course, right? And that's the same thing with like picking the lesser of two evils to give just a little bit of power, a little bit of evil power to some president or whatever. But it's okay because the other guy would have been worse. When you keep playing that game over and over again, what you end up with is where we are now, which is, you know, $34 trillion in debt. The Congressional Budget Office says we'll be $121 trillion in debt by 2050. And that was before COVID spending under Trump and Biden. You know, with an increasingly swelling government. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. So I don't know.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. You know, some people, they want to play that game, the status game, win status prizes. And they're like, oh, look, see, the government's just growing a little bit slower, this or that. They're just kicking the can down the road, much like the Federal Reserve printing currency and saying, oh, well, we'll just make the pain less obvious right now. We'll try to hide.
No, hold on, pause. I know I'm interrupting again. It's kind of a dick move, but real quick, you know what it reminds me of? You know what you just it reminds me of those articles you see where I saw this article and it was like, it was from like, I don't remember which publication, but it was a major publication. And they were like, inflation rate has gone down, but prices keep going up, economists say. Like they were perplexed. And it was like, yes, the rate of growth has gone down, but it's still fucking growing, you fucking dolt, right? Like, it's like the problem is not getting better. It's just getting worse, slower. That's not anything to celebrate. That's actually something to be afraid of. Sorry, it just popped in my head and I was like, oh my God, it's exactly like that. I voted Republican. The rate of change is, you know, like, why are prices still going up?
Right. And that's just a framing bias game of someone saying, oh, okay, well, the past 3 months, as opposed to, okay, what's it been the past, 6 years and stuff like that. But exactly, whenever people lose sight of the bigger picture, they end up just losing out long term, because what they're doing is they're still supporting the government's growing in terms of size, scope, and power. And then they haven't fixed the root problems. And then eventually, of course, you end up destitute as the empire collapses. It doesn't matter, with Social Security being, an impossibility to solve. The liabilities are just too great. The debt with the U.S. government as well being too great. These are structural issues that if they are not solved at the root, it doesn't matter what you do. You could kick the can down the road a couple times just to make yourself feel better. But those inflationary effects are going to rise up. That those cost of living expenses are going to go up. Your freedoms are going to go down, and you're still going to be enslaved, and your children are still going to be enslaved, and they're going to be brainwashed and indoctrinated in state schools to love the state and to be state, apologia people. So that's why at every level, I say that the goal should be for someone to be principled. It doesn't mean, of course, when we talk about things like Libertarian Party, people often miss this. I say you need to have the core based principle, the leadership, elected positions, people running for office. And
the LP, like what's that? I don't know. All of their members have blocked me. I don't know what the LP is anymore. I don't have any contact with all of these pussies that have blocked me. I don't, Angela McArdle, and Clint Russell and Todd Haggerty. All of these people have blocked me. What is the LP? I don't know. Is that still a thing? Oh, I didn't know.
I am very disappointed because, obviously some of these people I'm still friendly with, but I am disappointed with the pandering and missing the big picture. Unfortunately, when it comes to these things, whenever you get into institutional power, there's economic incentives to institutional power, right? Your goal, once you get it and you have a paycheck and you have prestige, is to maintain that and to grow it. And if someone gets in the way of that, right, if they're like, oh, well, we need principled people, and they're like, well, we need to pander more to whatever group, like before, the Mises Caucus takeover it was the leftists, and now it's more on the Republican side. If you keep going that direction.
Like, I get it. I know why I get blocked. Like, I'm a dick. You're saying it in a very nice way, but like, let's be honest. I'm in there being like, why are you doing a rally with commies, you dumb fucks? And then they're like, all right, well, let's silence this voice. Like, I get it. I'm a dick online. I'm not helping.
I agree. I agree on that. I was not happy about the rally with the leftists myself. I thought that was a bad move because, again, if what happens, again, people don't understand this organizational psychology. When you bring in people to the LP, right, there's people coming in from the outside. They're like, okay, I don't like Republicans and Democrats and figure myself out. Okay, what's this about? If you're not there doing the deep education and holding the standards and saying, yes, you're here and you're here to learn what we are. You're here to learn our platform and our principles. If you're not doing that and holding them accountable, then what happens instead is the people inside then cater to those people as the outsiders start to demand that the LP becomes more comfortable with their sensibilities.
Yeah.
And then you have a complete collapse and you have all this fighting and you have people like, oh, you're not, doing outreach, all sorts of stuff. It's like, no, you will build a house of cards where your membership is indistinguishable from the mainstream left and right. And they will immediately flake at the littlest sign of inconvenience. And this happened time and again over 50 plus years. This is empirical, observable. You can study this. You have to say, we want new people coming in and learning, but you will stay here and you will learn these principles and we will mentor you until you're ready to accept them, adopt them, and live them. And until you have that entryism, you have an organization that is ripe to being completely destroyed and to be manipulated by perverse incentives. And unfortunately,
Would you be in favor of the LP adopting a kind of like an online class, a very simple online PowerPoint presentation with a test or whatever, right? Where in order to be a card-carrying libertarian, right? Like you can donate, you can vote or whatever, but in order to vote within the party and in order to be a card-carrying member, you have to pass a basic test of libertarian knowledge in order to have that membership. And saying I'm a card-carrying member of the LP or whatever is proof that you have at the very least, passed said test, saying like, this is what the LP believes about these specific stances. This is what the non-aggression principle is. Like very, very, like I'm not saying like you need to be able to define Kinsella's estoppel or like be able to like back up fucking argumentation ethics, right? But like you should know what the NAP is, right? Like you should know that like you know what I mean? Like just basic shit like that. Would you be in favor of that being like a thing where like we might have a smaller party, but all of the people that are card-carrying members, you can at least guarantee have some surface or basic level knowledge of what libertarianism actually is?
Every single endorsed candidate and every single person who is going to be elected to a leadership position at every single level, in my opinion, should be required to go through a extensive seminar on the Libertarian Party's platform principles, where they have to go through every point and learn through it and do check-ins. And then even after that, as you said, taking a test or examination that checks to see whether they have at least seen those things and have internalized them to a degree that they're willing to say yes. Not some click-through thing where it's like, I agree when I click one button, like, some like terms of service thing that nobody reads, right? That's what they have right now. There is no material commitment to the principles. There is no material education required and signaling required to move forward. That is one of the worst possible things that has destroyed, in my opinion, the LP from maintaining that type of buy-in to the platform, which people don't even know. I posted about this today. The LP platform isn't tactics. It's not like, here's how to vote for this, or here's a bill.
It's principles.
Literally just the principles. This is just like, hey, by the way, these are the kind of the bare minimum things that we believe as libertarians. And it's like borderline somewhere between minarchism, anarchism, but it's really robust. It's actually very impressive. That's why I've been a fan of it for so long, for so many years. So if there isn't that type of entryism where every person has to literally go through these courses, go through itemized check-ins where they like review the concepts and have a summative test, and even maybe a panel, like a body panel of existing people who then do a Q&A, you know, kind of like a doctoral dissertation where you ask someone questions and they review you before you get your doctoral thesis approved. They need that for everything in terms of, we're talking elected positions.
I agree.
If they did that, the LP would probably be successful beyond the wildest imaginations, because everyone who will have gone through that gets it. And if you go through that process and you're like, oh, actually, this isn't for me, well, then great. You're not going to be in there fighting people over just what are basic Libertarian Party tenets.
Right.
And that happens so much. Again, it's not to say that. Sorry.
I just want to say, I think part of the problem really stems from the fact that like the LP is the LP. And what I mean by that is it's not the Freedom Party. It's not the Freedom Caucus. It's not the Liberty Movement. It's the Libertarian Party. It has attached its name to a philosophy. And if it can't hold up itself as a philosophy, then it destroys both the meaning of the philosophy in the public eye and the party. The two of them become inexorably linked. And that has always been an issue for me personally, because if you're going to name yourself a Libertarian Party, what you're telling me, you know, taking, you know, some success from the communists, right? What you're telling me is you are the vanguard party of this philosophy, not that you are like a meaningful third party that's about liberty in general. Like you're telling me you're a philosophical party that's meant to be the wedge, the hammer, the nail, all of it for a cultural revolution, a philosophical revolution based upon the ideas of Murray Rothbard and Mises and those that have come after them in perfecting those ideas. And like, I don't know that can ever really work for a political party. I don't, maybe it can. Maybe it can. I hope it can.
It certainly can. And this is,
well, I just mean like a political party in the American sense, in the way that those parties have to operate. Like it has to be something different.
Oh, I think it can. And I think the reason why it can is that the cultural shifting is enormous and ongoing, right? You go back 20 years, you know, so this many times, you would be just like, wait, what are you talking about? The news writes about anarcho-capitalism in major outlets. Javier Milei's president. You know, there's been a libertarian in Congress with Justin Amash switching his party. There's been a libertarian elected to the Wyoming House. All this other stuff that you'd be like, whoa, okay, that's kind of crazy, right? You go back 20 years, and be like, this is insane. So I think people haven't internalized how much the liberty movement has grown to the point where you don't have to sit there and play pandering games or anything like this. You really don't. The remnant is there, and they're waiting for someone to come in and say, we're just going to be principled and focus on these principles consistently, and we're going to hold people to account for that, and we're going to build up the next generation. Again, people come in, they're fresh, we're going to build those people up and train them, and if they don't agree, okay, we'll try our best, but you know, can't force someone to be libertarian, doesn't want to be, but we're going to take the willing, and those people who actually have those principles, they're going to outlast everybody, because they're not going to be, you know, swept away by whatever nonsense propaganda in the media. They're not going to be swept away by single issues, right? They're going to sit there and say, I know the propaganda of the state. They're a bunch of liars and thieves, and we want to have a free market. We want to have non-aggression, and we want to build a culture that respects this on a wider scale. And again, doesn't mean you need to convince everybody in America. Political, you could say, activism in terms of political structures is actually a very small percentage of the population that is required to basically work within that arena.
I mean, like that. That's where the 3%ers come from, right? Right. Is like the concept that like only 3% were fighting in the Revolutionary War, and that's larger percentage than in most situations. Yeah, I think the white pill. I don't know. We're kind of off on a thing, and I'm enjoying it. It's fun. I'm happy to have you. I'm so glad you came and spoke. There's not a lot of people in the movement that like I can have a substantive conversation about the philosophy before it just gets into populist rhetoric and energeia and stories and it is fun. It is it's different. I love having little autism days, you know. But no, I think my white pill moment, honestly, more than anything, was I noticed two things. First, I noticed that conservatives started using our language out of nowhere. I started noticing that conservatives 10 years ago never used the term the state. It never occurred. Like, you would never, if you go back and you listen 10 years ago, they wouldn't say the state does this, the state does that. They'd say our government does this, we have wedged in the state, especially once they started targeting Trump and shit like that. Like, then all of a sudden they were like the goddamn state, you know, and like you saw people that were paleo libs, you know, like Alex Jones, you know what I mean? Like the deep state, you know, they might have the deep state and things like that, but they never used the term the state, and they never used terms, and there was other terms. And then the second thing that I saw was in the lead up to the last presidential election in 2020. I saw people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder, political online right-wing conservative, if you will, pundits, adopting basic libertarian things and then saying that this is why libertarianism is bad, because this is what conservatism actually argues for. And I would see Ben Shapiro in arguments being like, you know, like a community. I was like, have you never met like Amish people? Like, they're the most libertarian people in America. Like, what are you talking about? Like, they would try and push back against the libertine, you know, the Chase Oliver, you know, Joshua Inkle, Nicholas Sarwark, kind of like more left-wing valued libertarians, whether you like them or not, or whether you consider them libertarians or not. Regardless, like, culturally they're more left wing, but like there's this, they would create this straw man boogeyman of like libertarians as like a drag queen story hours supporting lefty pride flag waving, you know, like let everyone do the heroin thing. And I was like, oh, you have to straw man us now. You didn't used to have to, because now we're a part of the conversation. If you're not careful, we'll take your people from you. And I was like, those have been my two biggest recent, like, kind of like white pills as far as this is concerned, because I do think we're making inroads, and I think there's a lot of damage that's being done, and there's a lot of fighting, and we're really bad at it because you know, our greatest weapon is also our greatest weakness. And, you know, praise be to the great Dave Smith, who's always perfect when he stated, you know, who stated that, you know, weaponized autism, you know what I mean? Like it is certainly like it is certainly a thing, but I hope we can have more conversations like this. And I think more people are seeing conversations like this and starting to see the wisdom of some of the basics of the philosophy. They're starting to see like, oh, the state power that I voted for gets used against me. They're starting to see like, oh, the government keeps claiming that they're really good and efficient with these things, but even Newt Gingrich's welfare reform didn't fucking do anything, right? Like the Republicans, the Republicans talk a big game, but why are we $34 trillion in debt? Like, they've done nothing. You know what I mean? Like, I think some of the kind of the basic things that woke us up are starting to become like widespread and widely kind of like accepted. And I don't know where that leads to. I think it leads to populism, and populism is really fucking scary, because populism sometimes turns into fascism, sometimes it turns into libertarianism, sometimes it turns into communism. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know where populism goes because it's a baby ideology, but it's certainly there.
Yeah, I mean, the changes that have happened, especially in the past 10 years, with the influence of libertarians and ANCAPs really getting on the culture war. Certainly, me and my wife, the philosopher, were at definitely the spearheading of that. We certainly were part of influencing the influencers and helping to bring those people toward a libertarian perspective. And we did that specifically through the gun rights messaging stuff. We were absolutists, and we, grew a lot of fandom out of that, because we understood that if you're or consider yourself a conservative and in one area, you can understand, right, this is a gun. It can be used to harm people, but it could also be used to help people. It doesn't act on its own. And the government has no right to tell me what I can or can't own for self-defense. You've already got down in one area, libertarian theory, this idea of sovereign property rights. And if I can get you to agree to that, I can just start walking to the other property rights and say, okay, you understand that for guns, even though they have risk. Okay, well, let's start going to other things. What about things you put in your body? What about, things that you want to have for your home, right? Things that again, you're not harming anybody. Where does this stop? And then where can we lead people if they continue realizing this philosophy further and further? And we still do that work to this day. And as you correctly noted, it was so effective, us and others included. Of course, there's other people who are very influential at this point. It got so big that there was not just a coordinated government attack against this. If you remember after 2016, the 2017-18 mass purges, right? The attacks on social media accounts with them being taken down, 800 pages being taken in a day. We were certainly one of the ones who were attacked on that in this coordinated effort. And philosopher was written about in a Harvard and UPenn study thing about right-wing radicalization on YouTube and all this other stuff. It's wild,
right. I kind of remember that vaguely.
Yeah.
Because I was maybe like a baby libertarian then.
Yeah. So we got so powerful with our messaging, when I say we, I mean the people who are principled ANCAPs who did so radically with viral content, that there was a response. And it was really capturing people even at TPUSA and other types of movements where they were starting to adopt our language, saying taxation is theft and other things like that. And because it was so effective, the propaganda
pause. Can I just say, is there nothing funnier than watching a Republican be like, taxation is theft? And then especially like a Christian conservative Republican being like, taxation is theft and God commands that I don't steal. Anyways, we have a few programs we'd like to talk about. And I'm just like, I love it. But at the same time, I'm like, fucking what, my guy? Like, oh my God. I always find that funny.
Two-faced about that. Absolutely. I appreciate it. And I just see that as an opportunity to further educate people and make sure they mean what they say. Of course.
Oh my God, you're so fucking nice. Why are you so goddamn nice?
Because the goal, as always, we're here to change minds for liberty. We love people. We want them to have, peaceful homes with peaceful parenting and schooling. We really value what we're saying. We've been doing this for years. So that I know you're just teasing. I'm just trying to emphasize that this is something that's near and dear to us, and that's why we take it so seriously. One, we're holding people accountable to those principles and reminding people of the vision. So when it came to that threshold, we had this massive attack by the coordination of the government, and of course with some of these Republican, I'll just say, groups that were like, oh my gosh, the libertarians are winning. You know what I mean? They're actually winning the culture war. We got to stop them, right? I mean, even Klaus Schwab, right? Not too long ago, I think a few months ago, he said, there's this anti-system called libertarianism, right? Our names are in their mouths because that's how effective we've been at pushing back against them and being a part of the influential group of helping people think outside the state and rejecting the state central planning and this great reset that they want to force on everybody. So, it's easy to see that. Like for us as libertarians and ANCAPs, it's very easy to see the bad guys in terms of the status, but then where it's tough for them because everyone's at a different point in their walk of libertarian life, it's difficult for them to see the psychology that it takes to have victory. And that's kind of what we push back on people is we're saying, hey, this is the framework you need if you want to win hearts and minds sustainably, not have them be like, yeah, I was libertarian when I was 13 or, 2 years later. Oh, well, no, this is the most important election ever. I got to leave. If you want people to stay principled, they have to have that robust thinking. Again, as you said before, they don't have to become academics. We're not asking people to get PhDs in Austrian econ here.
Right.
We are just asking people understand the foundations to self-ownership, non-aggression, the nature of the state, just economically, what is the fundamental nature of the state in terms of violence and orchestration, and how it takes out of the market through that violence the alternatives that if the government wasn't doing that, people would be free to choose. If we can get people just to focus on that and remember, okay, right, government's not the solution. Government is creating the problems and distortions. That's right. I'm not going to let this fear-based mindset of whatever boogeyman comes up, let me be distracted from that. I'm going to only support those who are principled, principled across the board, and I'm going to look for any opportunity I can to cut the size, scope, and power of the state. It could be you vote for a ballot initiative, right, that there's decrim on, or you could say, okay, this tax cut opportunities come up. Okay, great. A tax cut is a theft cut, right? Just like if we could pull out of one area in a warfare zone, that's lives saved. I don't care. I'm like, I want to have as much lives saved and money saved as possible, not by making the state seem better, but by cutting the government theft, by cutting the government violence. That's not making the state better. That's ending the violence. Again, if you stop a robbery, you're ending the violence. If you stop the theft by the government, you're ending the violence. If you're stopping the war, you're ending the violence. We're not here saying, oh, the government would just be more polite in this battlefield over here, right? So once people can get those basics, even if they don't know every single thing, they're set. They can at least refer back to those basic principles and remind themselves, right, the government caused these problems. They're not the solution. I got to think outside the state, and I'm going to apply myself accordingly with my time, my votes, resources. And if you do vote, resources, dollars, whatever, you're doing that consistently by supporting those who consistently support liberty, whether it's a political arena or in the private market arena. Again, you don't have to fix everything or save the world yourself. You just have to say, I'm not going to support statism and give into, the fear mongering. You do that. Whew, if we could just do that, we get a Javier Milei in the end, right? You finally get to the Javier Milei. So
yeah, I appreciate you. I'm super glad you came and spoke. I do like ending a little bit on a white pill. I do think that there are always going to be disagreements philosophically, especially when it comes to the complex nature of the state. Because, as much as I hate Abraham Lincoln, he has this quote in Temperance Address that's really, 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 really good. I'll paraphrase it because I'm not going to look it up and read it out. But basically, it's the rider and the elephant, right? Before the rider and the elephant, he's saying, label a man to be an enemy, and your words will be, no matter how truthful they are, no matter how, virtuous and logical they are and righteous your cause, like, no matter how much you throw, your argument may steel, I think it says your argument is made sharper than steel can be made. And though you throw it with Herculean force, it'll be no more likely to pierce him than, a straw rye on a tortoise's shell. Right. And what I think by that is, we like to think that we start from principles. Nobody does. Nobody starts from principles. Even the hardcore libertarians, right? They start from an intuition, a moral intuition, and then they use those principles to try and test whether or not that moral intuition is true. And sometimes I think we end up in different conclusions because of that, because we have different moral intuitions and things are really, really, really complicated. And I think the open borders, closed borders situation might be one of those, right? Where some of us, maybe our moral intuition is towards like the evil of stopping, a young woman with her child from crossing the border for no fucking reason to just try and come into a better life. And then the other people that are looking at like the welfare state and the Klaus Schwabs and the inability to, the rights violations that the state does, and knowing that that woman comes in and I have no right to exclude her, and I have no right to not have more and more of my paycheck stolen each time as the poor and the middle class all get dragged down. And these two moral intuitions are wildly different. And the libertarian principles get tested here. And often we might arrive at very close, but maybe slightly different places. But on most things, I think we do agree. On most things, I think it is, how these things, our end goal is the same. And maybe the tactics are a little different. But it is a long fight that we have ahead of us. Hopefully it's a long fight, because a short fight probably means something a lot worse. But I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your positive energy and your passion. I've had to interrupt you a bunch of times because you were just fucking going, and I was just like, you were so into it. Definitely buy his books. They sound like good reads, and I'll understand, you might be nice and passionate. I have to tailor myself. What the hell? You split the camera to do that, and I was like, yo, what is happening?
Just figure out showing off multi-camera.
Yeah, for sure. I recognize that you're doing a great job talking to so many people. My job, for the most part, where my niche has been screaming at Gen Z communists in Twitch and YouTube politics and doing debate panels and things like that. So it changes the way that I view the battlefield, because my battlefield is usually going against socialists and communists and like right wingers that are like really just lefties. And so like I'm in a different space. And so the way that I fight this battle is a little bit differently. So it's less smiles and less positive energy and more screaming, and more random rape analogies to really beat it into people's heads. But I appreciate you coming. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much for being here. JackVLloyd.com. Anything else that you want to shout out, or people that other people that you think should check out too, whatever, however.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Thanks again. It's been an honor to talk this out with you and to just, help people, remind themselves of where they're at and where we're trying to go with things and remind them what's in their control versus what's not, often is very helpful. So I really appreciate that. So you can definitely check out my stuff, jackvloyd.com, JACK, V as in voluntarist, LLOYD, jackvloyd.com. My wife's website for the philosopher is THEPHO, like pho, the Vietnamese dish, the philosopher.com. We just love helping people, learn about the principles of liberty, encouraging people to get their kids out of state schools, because that's really a big root of this is actually the trauma and brainwashing that takes place there is really what sets up the generation to be readily controlled. So if we want to break that matrix, the first thing is to get them out of the system. So definitely do that. I appreciate everyone and anyone who's been a big supporter of ours. I just want to thank you, the fans who've helped us throughout the years, getting to where we are, doing everything that we do, from obviously fun stuff like the comic series, to doing the nonfiction books and our Unschool Adventures book. And then we got a new music video that's going to be getting ready. We're going to be launching the pre-production stuff for that coming up. So we're just going to keep on trucking like we do, teaching people and helping them become principled, and also, teaching them the values that actually help them in their immediate life. Because our ideas that we espouse are not just simply about libertarian theory. It's also application, and that has real application when it comes to individuals and their relationships with others, when it comes to their children, when it comes to how they think about the world. And so, we just want everyone to become a little bit more philosophical for liberty and to feel richer in every area of their life, because of that, because we do have answers, we do have solutions, and we do know what the government is doing to our money. So libertarians can help people be like, hey, how do you hedge against this? So that's what we love doing.
All right. Well, hopefully I'll see you around more. Love to, whenever you want to chit chat or anything, you send me a DM and vice versa. I had a great time. See you around, Jack.
My pleasure. Take care, Scott.
All right. Let's, cheers. You will get 2K eventually. Bro, I have been sitting. Hold on, let me check. Let me check right now. I have been hovering at 1995, and then I'll lose 2 people and gain 2 people, and it's so bad. I'm in 1997, which is what I started the stream with. So I have the same amount that I started stream with. I need 3 subs to get to 2K. And even when I get to 2K, it'll probably dip back down for, I don't know what is going on. I need to release another, I'll be working over the next couple days to release another standalone video. Cause I just get sent out to a different crowd as opposed to live streams. And then maybe that'll, pump us up, because the live streams basically only get sent to people that are already subscribers. It's insane, man. You spit truth and create solid I appreciate it. Jump on a panel or 2. Emperor Dave, what are you talking about? I do Prime Guys every Monday. I just did a WIC panel. I just did a show with Ignoring Chat. You have to get invited to those. You can't just jump on. But I appreciate it. Oh, thanks for the sub. Yeah. I hold you and Zulu as my main sources for libertarianism. I appreciate that. I think Zulu is better than me in a lot of ways. More learned for sure. Though I don't know, I think I edge out on him in some real world wisdom sometimes. I've experienced more, I've done more, so maybe there's some of that, but in terms of theory, I appreciate that you would even put me in the same camp. Zulu is great. He's amazing. I know. Find a different panel. Yeah, it's just you know what I mean. You have to get invited to panels. It's not a thing that you just get to go do. On Friday, check out Speakeasy for a panel called Verbal Combat. Crucible goes on there sometimes, and Smeth was on. Is Smith even okay? I don't. Smith being on, who cares? Whatever. But yeah, I'll check it out. Speakeasy. Where is that? Can someone in Discord send me a link to Speakeasy or whatever? I might be able to see. All right, what's up, crowd? I'm about to get out of here. I've synced it. I'm actually about to get out of here, crowd. I just finished a conversation with Jack Lloyd. Rewind it. I think it was a great conversation. Zulu's a great theory head, but you're more personal. Oh, thank you so much. You just like that I say dumb shit and tell fart jokes. All right, that's all it is. I'm more approachable. But join the Discord over the next couple days. I don't have anything planned live until Monday, probably. But over the next couple days, I'll be working on a couple of things and probably get something out this weekend. I'm excited for it. We will see. I've got something fun planned. Stay tuned in the Discord. Give us a sub. Give us a like. And I'll see you guys around. Thank you so much.